All right. So I'm definitely making some headway with my intention with the J world, with my background, even the J juice as a reflection, a light, an ionic energy that, wow, put a huge spotlight on everything in our society. Like, I couldn't just focus on one thing and discriminate and be so discriminative that I leave everything else out. Everything is connected. The science, the religion, the politics, all the people in their separate countries, the races, everything. It's all connected. Everything is connected. It's finding those connections and getting past the walls of separation that people have purposely put down so you stay compartmentalized. What do you mean, people? Well, the system. It's a lot to absorb when making connections between everything. And so to make the world palatable, this is my opinion, the way the system makes the world palatable to people is they give them a little bit of information at a time. Whether it's in college, whether it's through a religion, or through a political thought process, or even a scientific way of explaining things. The system gives everybody a little bit of information at the time, and then they watch them react, and then sometimes people do make alliances and make connections. But you still have to, well, I'll say you still have to, but it is good to make the alliances and then disengage so you don't become corrupt from those alliances. And that's what I discovered in the J world is that, yes, I made alliances in the beginning and it moved me forward. But if I were to stay in those alliances way back in the beginning of the whole J world, yeah, I wouldn't be able to make any of these connections because I would be stuck in dogmatic principles, biased, and then fall into another religion or develop another religion, which was happening, which is I understand why then Kelly Harris, one of my early moderators, had to disengage because she was part of another religion that this couldn't compete with it. And I completely understood. When she said that a couple years ago, I was like, dude, she is so right the fuck on. She is so right on. Smart freaking lady. So I learned a lot from the people that I was in alliance with. And that's, in my opinion, that's the nature of life. That's the nature of the world. If you want to live indefinitely, is that you learn from everyone that you are in alliance with for a brief amount of time. And then you disengage. And then it becomes like acquaintances because people that you learn from, anyone that triggers you, you learn from them. You learn why you get triggered. I told someone last night, sometimes their posts and whatever they trigger me, but it's because it was something I had to focus on. I had to figure out, I had to rip that apart. I had to rip apart the things that were triggering the fuck out of me and analyze it and realize, okay, the people that do trigger the hell out of me are the lessons in my world. I'm not saying what they're doing is right or wrong or bad or no. It's just the fact that it's a reflection that I needed to examine. And so, and that's, in my opinion, that's what life is. Though some people will say life is staying within their compartmentalized world, and which I understand too, and live out whatever that life is. Okay. And that's fine. And I am another petri dish of a culture. So I remember when I joined the independent movement way back in 2003, 2004, because someone I was dating was in the independent movement, and their whole premise was consensus. And I mean, everybody agree. That's essentially what the person was aiming for, is that both the Democrats and Republicans agree on something without this division of war and back and forth. And okay, well, consensus into what? It just depends on what it is. Well, that wasn't where I was going to stay. I wasn't going to stay in that world of cultivating consensus between people because I don't know what the hell I'm consenting to. There was a lot more that I had to uncover what we're trying to consent to before I adopt that lifestyle of let's all play consensus. So I got away from the independent movement because that's not where I was headed towards. And so finally, I uncovered, well, go back a minute before I get to that point. I remember my mother was asking, why are you, or like, what's the whole premise? You know, what's the whole point of the independence? Because she's Democrat, conservative Democrat. And I'm like, well, because of corruption, anti-corruption. She's like, okay. And so when I look back on how I explain that, and even the platform of, oh, we got to stop all the corruption in politics and all that stuff, I'm just like, oh, that was such a juvenile, very simplistic way of explaining why I would join the independent movement. Anti-corruption. And and I'm like, okay. And that's what I'm saying. Okay, that's a really simplistic way of looking at the world. You're trying to end corruption everywhere. Well, it's not that you end corruption now that I'm 50, well, I'll be 50 in February. Now that I'm 49, 50 years old, it's not about ending corruption. It's lessening the deadly effects of corruption, where that corruption bleeds all over you and then completely corrupts you and takes away your life force. It's about managing corruption and even regulating it. That's what it comes down to. So no, I didn't want to stay in the independent world of where it's like anti-corruption politics, anti-this, anti-that. When in reality, it's not about ending corruption, because a little bit of corruption is like the uracil in the DNA. It's evolution. But so much corruption is death. So when you think about like evolution, it could be like corruption, but it's a corruption that you can make a choice. You can die from the corruption, die from the evolution, or you can live and rebuild from that corruption or that evolution. And so there is even a reason why evolution sounds like evolution, because I don't think evolution is bad, but some people say evolution is bad because they don't want to be corrupted. But every single time you get together with people in sexual congress, even in the presence of diverse company, even your family, you do get corrupted. To what level, to what degree? Well, it all depends upon how influential the energy is and what their practices are in politics, religion, and science. And so then I'm thinking, remember, I also was so against people writing scripture on my profile. I was tired of hearing people write all their scripture. And so I was so resistant against the religious folk that were just dropping their scripture. And I'm just like, and I'm like, okay, I don't want anyone putting anything like that on my Facebook, because I want to be the one to guide that carefully. But I realized I was so resistant because that was something I had to examine. Oh, I recognize that. But again, every kind of learning experience, you have to go through the corruption. You have to go through the process. You must, because you have to experience what it's like to be resistant against something, and then examine what you are resisting. So that way it doesn't become a mutually assured destruction, because the more you resist, the more persist, and then it's called breakage and death. And I don't want to freaking die from me resisting something, a person, place, or thing. It's understanding the concepts around what it is I'm resisting and not turning to a resistance, but an understanding. And there is some connection to what it is I'm doing. And so then I was examining fertility. I discovered fertility was deadly. Fertility is the scientific, well, it's the biology of the physics concepts of thermodynamics called senescence and decay and entropy. And of course, there's a way to balance out entropy and negentropy, but our system focuses more on entropy and fertility versus balancing those two out, because the system needs to be the regulator. That's the government. They are the regulator of human life. And while they seem like they're corrupt, while yes, some of them can be, there are people in government can be corrupt, to what degree is the corruption? Because if it's so corrupt, then it'd be all out human annihilation. And of course, the government can't allow that. And that's why there is all these wars, and a lot of regulation that some people do mischaracterize. I even have, okay? I mean, remember, I don't like the hospital system or the holistic system or anything like that. But that's just because I know that we're at the end of the genetic line, end of the old world, and there's a lot of people who are very corrupt or corrupted that must use the medical holistic system because that's all they can use right now at this point. And I'm not saying they're corrupt like, oh, in the sense that they're bad people. It's just that their immune system has been compromised by so much diversity that it's causing misfirings and causing them to be under a doctor's care. And then eventually we know where that ends up over time. People die suddenly, or they die from cancer, disease, chronic illness, autoimmune disorders, and all that. And so when I discovered that fertility is deadly and realized that there is microbial fornication even just through exchanging, the same air, or you're breathing on someone, or you're coughing on someone, and then sometimes it turns into cancer, disease, and even a child when it triggers sexual reproduction. And then I'm looking at the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and so then that's when I finally explored that side of the scriptures and realized that Earth is actually Eden. Earth is the Garden of Eden, though I had to bring it down to a very palatable, scalable model that I could relate to, which is like a biodome. So then I'm asking questions on Facebook just to myself, like, when was the Garden of Eden? How long were they there? What did they eat? Did they go to the bathroom? Were they cold? What was the temperature? Was there climate change? All these things that we're dealing with now, they had to have gone through that back then. But then I'm like, shit. Okay, so that was so they're saying that the Garden of Eden was like 10,000 years ago. Okay, they're saying something BCE or 8,000 BCE, so 10,000 years ago. So I'm like, okay, so that's not really that long. I mean, it is and it isn't. Because then I hear that there were advanced civilizations of Sumerian people or whatever 241,000 years ago. Well, I don't know how the hell you prove that, though. The research that someone did, I just listened to one or read one blog site. They were saying, well, they say that the Sumerian dynasties were around, maybe 10,000, maybe 20,000, something like that. I forget exactly the number. But so the kings were the biomarkers of those dynasties. So if there were no kings 200, 450,000 years ago, just people, and they lived a very short life. Okay, so those are probably like Neanderthals or Denisovan or Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Arthropicus, or Pithala, whatever you want to call them. Okay, or they were modern humans that were like Neanderthals or Denisovans. Then you think the Garden of Eden was like a biodome in the middle of an indigenous population, like a bubble, like the Bubble Boy, remember the movies? And it was a controlled climate type situation. You had really advanced humans that were on this earth that were watching all the Denisovans and all the different hominids. And then they played science experiment with one and then gave him, so there's Adam and then you have Eve. And they're in this garden that has the Truman Show, it has walls, and maybe there's an ocean, or maybe there's water, and there's animals, and there's fruits, and who knows what kind of food I don't know if they said what they were eating. But they were told not to eat from this certain tree. Now, I don't know, really had knowledge. Maybe it did, maybe the tree had like orchids, and it gave them more knowledge, right? Because when you think about evolution, how did mankind go from, Homo habilis all the way to where we are today? Well, yeah, it was the food, it was the orchids, it was the plant material, then it was the meat, and then the milk, the cheese, eggs, all that stuff. Okay, so maybe they ate a certain orchid that gave them knowledge and awareness of even their nudity, shame. Okay, now this is allegory. I'm sure it was embellished, but I'm sure there was certain experiments. And so when they ate from that tree of knowledge and they were told not to, and God or the scientist person found out that they did, and then they hid. Like dogs, when they do something bad, they hide, right? When they know they did something wrong and they know they'll get in trouble, they go and hide from the owner or look guilty. Well, allegedly in that story, that Adam and Eve hid from God and realized they put clothes on and put stuff on to hide all their body parts. And then God figured out that they violated his rules and then cast them out into where then to go fend for themselves. They were in paradise. Essentially, Adam and Eve, and I don't even think that Eve was made from the freaking rib, but whatever. But essentially, Adam and Eve were in paradise. And as long as they followed God's law, whatever that was, they didn't die. And who knows how long they were in there for. They were immortal. But even that is like, that's an assumption. I'm just going to say it's that. But I'm going to make the assumption that if they hadn't violated the rule of law from God, they would have stayed in that little bubble forever. But, well, we can't go back and redo that, but now maybe we can. Okay, that's what I'm now saying, that Eve's rebellion, that maybe if we, I mean, I've been corrupted, yes, but can we turn the hands of time back and become uncorrupted? Well, you really can't, because you have a bunch of people, because Adam and Eve were the only people in that little biodome of that Garden of Eden. And then when they were cast out, it wasn't like Eve had sex with her sons and made all the different races. No, there were so many different other tribes of humans out there that weren't as advanced as Adam and Eve. And so when God cast them out into the wilderness, into the hinterlands, and Adam and Eve had to go wander. And then they had Cain and Abel and all that, and then then you had all these tribes of people and whatever. That was, in my opinion, that was how then the human race was cursed, or told through allegories, how they were cursed through fertility, through the pains of suffering, of bearing children, and disease, and war, and then the rest is history. So I figured out that little biodome, when you think about it, actually represents Earth. And that when you do violate the laws of life and then they develop fertility, you can only do that for so long before then you're cast out into, not so much outside the biodome and cast out of the Garden of Eden, but now you're cast into the universe and it's dark out there. And the other side, or the upside down, is like this huge dark plasma of souls wandering, looking for a body to inhabit. Still in a parallel universe, watching the live people do what they do. And when they find an opening, this was about possession, right? Because I remember seeing those orbs around me when the climate changed. Pandora's box, and that's what that movie was, or that YouTube video was mentioning, Pandora's box. And all the demons and spirits and all that stuff come out. But when you think about climate change, and when they were changing the frequencies, I remember even my refrigerator was going crazy and getting all cattywampus, and I had to go unplug it and reset it a few times. Haven't had that happen at all since 2022. But yeah, then you could see that there was a thin layer between the dead world and the alive world, and then I saw all these orbs. And so that, yeah, you could see the upside down, the other side, through certain electronic means. And so that's that. When you think about death, that is God casting out those who violate the laws of life, those who violated their body through fertility, through drugs, alcohol, and all that stuff, through not releasing their demons, through so many things. They are cast out of the Garden of Eden. That's called, the upside down. It's called heaven or hell. Well, see, hell is fertility. Hell is the fertility. That's what hell is. What do you think I felt the last freaking 7 years, the last 6 years? I'm birthing a new idea. It was hell. People were freaking coming after me for that. And then the last 3 years, through this climate change, it was another fertility awakening, and it was hell. It was literally hell. It was hot. I was like sweating. I was sick. I could barely move. I could barely eat. And so when you think about fertility, it is the hell. And then at some point, some people can survive hell. But you surely can't. You can survive hell and it's not hell anymore. But that takes a lot of releasing the corruption out of your body. Because that's the whole thing with the J world. It's releasing those demons so you're not in hell anymore. What do you mean you're not? Because when people get sick, that's a hell that they have to deal with. That's fever. It's infection. That's all the things that the system tries to control through the medical holistic system. And sometimes that fever and infection turns into sexual reproduction. That's another hell of sexuality and sexual orientation. And the things that run you. I remember feeling so possessed sometimes from that sex demon. It was crazy. It was crazy. I remember at one point I was just crying because I knew I was fucking controlled by it. I didn't know how to freaking release it. I finally did. I mean, I finally got over that certain... But I'll tell you, man, some point in my life where I was like, holy shit, this thing inside me is so freaking powerful. And I knew it controlled the hell out of me. And I'll tell you, those demons do get developed from people who have intention to develop those demons. And it's not illegal because it's everywhere. And there's certain ways to do that. But I'll say, man, you know, when you finally release those demons and you go through all the traumas of your world and you release that and you release it and you build up and release and build and release, then you're like, okay, no more hell. Sometimes when the environment is aggressive, and of course my husband comes home, we still have Congress, so at least once a week. Okay. So I'm taking on his demons. Okay. And then, when I mean by taking on demons, so I'm taking in all of his essence because we're sharing the same air. His microbes jump on me. It's just, that's what happens in marriages and relationships and living with people and being around people, even in occupations. People share microbes. And you must release those demons. And so when I'm taking on those demons and then the climate changes and I feel the heat, it's just for a minute and then it's released. But when you're holding on to so many corrupted demons in your body and the climate changes, that's what people don't survive. That's the died suddenly, that's the cancer, the turbo cancers, that's the heart attacks, that's the strokes, that's all that. And so when you think about Adam and Eve, it literally is the allegory of humans. When they do corrupt themselves, they get cast out of paradise, and that's earth. But the way the system makes it palatable is to develop all these religions, which, yes, religions do spring up from long suffering and people who are who needed to develop another offshoot. They then justify what it's like to die from all the corruption. And that's why you see so many people who claim to be so pious and pure then have a private life that does come out in the open. People are like, oh my God, that priest had this kind of sex and they shouldn't. And that this and this nun was this. Oh my gosh. And so, yeah, I'm telling you, the world, man. I was listening to a YouTube video this morning about Mormons, the cult of Mormonism. And I was just like, oh my gosh. He's like, how did one man fool 16 million people? I'm just like, it's not that difficult. It really isn't. And then all the different offshoots of religions that come from that. And if you're artistic and long suffering and you have platforms to come from, all you gotta do is just like chemistry. You just modify the platform, put your own spin on it, get a bunch of believers who need something else aside from what they have. There you go, another religion. It's not that difficult to develop religion. You just got to be creative, great with words, charismatic, and then the government watches. That's the 1960s, 70s, 80s. That's all the cult mentality. That's all over your fucking groups on Facebook. New religions spring up every single moment. And that's why, again, I got away from the groups. I don't really talk to anyone. I just do my thing. I represent. I'm mostly solitary unless my husband comes home. I don't play the games anymore like I did. I don't need to play those games. anymore like I did. Because I released a lot of my demons, and I also know that when I do take on demons from the public and from my husband, I have to release those lest they corrupt me. And so that's why I haven't dropped an egg since early last summer or late summer, early fall. Okay, but yes, dropping eggs is a sign that there is diversity within that's causing fornication. And dropping an egg, looking for then the next phase of sexual reproduction is attracting a mate. And so I wanted to give you that just off the top of my head before I went through the actual writing. It's not that much because I actually because I'm pretty much narrowing everything down. The whole J world is basically Eve's rebellion and taking back paradise. Because that's what Earth is. Earth is the paradise. Earth is the Garden of Eden. Okay, but I have to go and examine religion and the people in the religions and even the men in these religions who enslave the women and even the men. So I read somewhere, some men say some women tempt them, therefore she is evil. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't expect your wives and daughters to have families and children without temptation. Of course, the Madonna whore syndrome. That's in Catholicism. That's what develops wives and daughters, is temptation with expectation. That's how fertility is developed, is through temptation. And so I think it's disingenuous for men to say some women are horrible because they tempt them when they want them to be temptresses as their wives developing children. Or else you're just raping them to have a family. Okay? So if your wife is supposed to enjoy it, if she's not supposed to enjoy it and make the man do whatever he has to do, then basically he's just raping her. That's literally what he's advocating. She can't be a temptress and be hot and be beautiful to be his wife, because you see people in religions, especially some of the most extreme religions, they have wives. They say, oh, we're not supposed to have sex. Bullshit. You do. You have a wife for a reason. What, is she your slave? Okay, I mean, what is having a wife? To do your dishes? To sweep your floors? To listen to you go on and on about whatever? No, you have her for a reason. And some people have kids from that. Oh, well, how did that happen? It wasn't immaculate conception, okay? And so I think it's disingenuous for men to say some women are horrible because they tempt them when they want them to be temptresses as their wives developing children. Or else you're just raping them to have a family. To say certain women and men have Jezebel spirits speaks to how biased that man truly is. Because when he lays with his wife, she must have a Jezebel spirit to submit to him. That is incorporated in all marriages, as well as all sexual relationships, all sexual orientations. You see, marriage was developed for the continuity of humanity and order, as well as nation building, and of course, human experimentation. And of course, it's consent too, right? But the extremism of religions birthing from families and nations developed such hypocritical point of views. While hypocrisy is not bad, so as long as you are aware of your own hypocrisy and able to explain it, why it's necessary in science and exploration and acceptance of humanity's choices, many religions claim to be one thing, like all pious and pure, when they are just as bad as the ones they are accusing holding demonic energy. And people say, oh yeah, that person, that religious satanic. Oh, okay. Do you have a family and children? Do you take all your remedies and you go get surgeries and you do all your stuff hanging out in groups of people? Well, fertility is corruptive, and yes, people in some religions like Satanism do have the pentagram and do worship fertility. And you happen to take on some of those characteristics. So I don't want to hear you claiming that some other religion is satanic when you worship fertility and the corruption of the immune system through that. Oh, but no, they found a way to explain it and justify it. That's why it's kind of crazy with religion. It's very hypocritical, and they find ways to justify it. That's why you have the duality of the Madonna whore, because she has to be a Madonna before she becomes a whore, right? And then she's a Madonna again because, so women in some religions have to be Madonna, so she looks like she's a good girl. then she's got to be a bad girl. But then after that bad girl, then she's got to be a good girl because now she's pregnant. If she doesn't get pregnant, then she's just a bad girl. So then that pregnancy makes her a good girl, but then that is the corruption of her, and that's taking away her life force. That's the hypocrisy of men. If people were pure of heart, uncorrupted, they wouldn't need a religion or group of people to confirm and reinforce their purity. There would be nothing to prove and nothing to preach. They would just live a mostly solitary lifestyle and write. What else are you going to do besides eat and poop, right? Art does come from corruption. Great, beautiful things come from corruption. And then there's an ending, sometimes a brutal ending, which is why artists are long-suffering. Just read the biographies of past artists and even current artists, even the artists of the 1960s. Just read stories of influencers and people of substance. So we inflict pain on each other to develop great resources, and then we have to clean the petri dish every so often, because then the petri dish becomes so corrupt and so out of control that it needs to then go to the wayside and start over again. So religion is an art which springs up from suffering, long suffering, and people do inflict pain on each other intentionally and unintentionally. Remember, when you worship a person, you also hunt the opposite. You hunt for that demon. And every religion is different, a different God and a different demon. So I just sit back and observe and watch everybody casting dispersions on each other. I released my demons. You saw them the last 7 years, even the last 3 years. Therefore, I worship no one. I live in partnership with a man, and I release my demons every morning. Because when you live with anyone and in a society, one must release those demons so one doesn't become so corrupted, leading to eventual death. That's the whole point of the J world. And so you understand what casting dispersions, it's an idiom that means to make damaging or derogatory marks about someone or something. Dispersions means to scatter something across a large area. And when I say fertility comes from corruption, it's not derogatory. Okay, fertility is casting dispersions. It's causing senescence. It's causing the chaos, particles. Those are seeds of a person that's now being scattered to the wind to go and corrupt something else, evolve something else. And so when I say fertility comes from corruption, it's not derogatory. It's scientifically proven, though some people would disagree. People do worship fertility gods. That's why the pentagram is used with fertility rituals. I'm not saying it's bad or good. People get married all the time in Christianity, Judaism, Muslim, all types of religions, even atheists, which is why all remedies and medicines are regulated by the government, even operations in alcohol and drug use. They do develop fertility and then eventual corruption, and sometimes even death. Well, all the time death, but sometimes, I mean, I could take one drink, and I'm not going to because I know I'll get hives the next day. I could probably smoke one cigarette, but I'm not going to. But I probably wouldn't die from, taking one drink or smoking one cigarette. But some people are so corrupt that that's what their habits are, that then eventually it does turn into death. So that's why I say sometimes even death. Okay, to what degree the corruption will determine if that person must be regulated by the government. So the world is not what you think, okay? A mass state of confusion and many people who think they are judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Before you accuse someone to be inhumane, you better look in your own backyard. Fight your own battles. Let other nations fight theirs. And yeah, all of these wars and the system trying to find a way to figure out how they're going to sacrifice people without forcing them into it. They give them so many chances, so many warnings, so many indicators. Be like, hey, change the way you do shit. Someone in your house or in your country is causing major shit. What are you going to do? And if you think it's a government plan, hey, that's fine. I've had government plans on my Facebook, and they test you. I'm serious. There are people out there that actually test people to see what they would do. Okay? That's government experiments. And so if the government has to set up situations where you think that's the enemy, even though it was contrived, it's still testing to see what you would believe in, how you would react, what you would do. And then they can tell just exactly by how you react to something, what you would do. And then that would mean that maybe it's time to evolve and develop the next segment of human history. Okay? And so, yeah, I mean, everyone right now is being tested. All of us are being tested on Facebook. All of us are being tested in every single country that we live in. Because if you don't have some kind of controlled testing, then it will be all out human annihilation. And the system wants to figure out the best prototype, the best alien human to live on this earth, because yeah, humans have the ability to be immortal, but in the state of what existence? And then how would you regulate, how would you develop, a society from that immortality? What would you do? How would you operate? What, And so before you realize that potential, you must mature and be responsible for what you do and what you do not do, and take personal responsibility. And so immortality is a huge responsibility, and it takes someone who understands all sides of the arguments and understands sometimes shit needs to happen, and know when you are not in control, and know when you have to leave that up to authority, a higher power. Okay? And so I said yesterday, or today, 2 hours ago, fertility equals symptom of cellular corruption. Now, people are like, oh, my kid isn't corrupted. Yes, everybody is. That's the whole thing of whole original sin. That was the whole sin. That's the whole Catholicism, is that you're born from sin. Well, no shit. I get it. And that's how they're able to balance both sides. You're born from sin, but here's a great life. But if you don't, if you violate the laws of life, then yes, death is the outcome. But we'll make that death as humane as possible until they can. And then it's like... But that's why Catholicism is huge out there. Huge. The Vatican, huge. A lot of these hospitals are based in Catholicism. Mercy Hospital or Catholic Charities and all, even the Seventh-day Adventists, or I don't know if were they Catholic? I don't remember. But I know that when I was in an orphanage, well, I don't know, but I was told when I was in an orphanage, it was Seventh-day Adventist. And so, yeah. So Catholicism understands balancing out both sides. Maybe you can call them hypocritical, maybe, but they understand both sides. You need to have life, and when that life becomes out of control, it must be regulated, and death is the outcome when life is out of control and so corrupt. And then you get cast out from the Garden of Eden into the hinterlands called the universe, floating around in some kind of ectoplasm, trying to find a body to inhabit. And so this is what I was saying. This is what I was thinking last night when my husband called me. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm developing a thing with the biodome. I'm just going through." And he's like, "Okay." And so I said I was in Uruk, which is basically a civilization back in Sumerian, but that was just a representation of the bigger picture. Okay, all these civilizations are a representation of the bigger picture of all of Earth and humanity. So Earth is the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve is the story of humans and their relationship between life and death, and why humans were programmed to die. They became too corrupted. There's always a higher power, a collective, a source of authority to keep everything together. Humans become so corrupt they start destroying each other, and then a higher power comes in and regulates. That's your law enforcement, that's your government, that's the world government, that's the UN, that's the World Health Organization. Okay? So I don't want to hear anyone say, "Oh my God, they're so bad." No, you happen to not realize that you become very corrupted when you're against the UN, the World Health Organization, against your own government, whatever it is, you have become very corrupted. Okay? And so, but it must be done in a way that gives people choices through the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, which will govern the conduct of nations. Sometimes you have to be corrupted to finally uncorrupt yourself. So to know that you're corrupted, to know that how to be uncorrupted, you get to even recognize where you are corrupted. And people don't even recognize that within themselves, and they're always pointing the finger. But in order to uncorrupt yourself, you must recognize to what degree you are corrupted. And that does take advanced thinking. That does take self-reflection. That does take being on your own and solitary, not in groupthink. Okay? But it won't make a difference if you don't survive your corruption. So survive corruption and don't ever make the same mistakes ever again, and release the demons. And so when you think about the word God in the Garden of Eden, this is my train of thought. It was probably one situation out of many when the gods came into an indigenous population and showed them amazing things, like Columbus to the Indians or the Native Americans. Showed them fruits and vegetables and animals and food. They don't really talk about bathroom habits or what kinds of foods, aside from the fruit trees, did they eat. I don't imagine they talked about killing any animals in the Garden of Eden to eat. What was the weather like? It had to have been cold at some point. they would have had to wear something to keep warm, build a fire, dig a pit to go to the restroom, or else you would have piles of poop all over the place. Where did they sleep? Even though it was just Adam and Eve, how long were they in the Garden of Eden for? I knew it was just 10,000 years ago the story took place. Did they live in a bubble? If there were advanced civilizations 241,000 years ago, did they live in a bubble, a biodome? Were they experiments? Maybe the story of Adam and Eve was a story of science experiments. And when they disobeyed the lead scientist or God, they were cast out of that dome to fend for themselves. Like parents kicking out children who disobey rules, cast out to fend for themselves and see what it's like to be in the real world taking care of themselves. They were essentially ruined when they ate from the tree of knowledge. Ashamed of their nudity, God figured out they violated the rules and banished them. The beginning of another chapter of mankind. Once Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, they had a family mixed in with lesser versions of themselves and helped teach mankind how to live and evolve themselves. And they were a representation of more advanced humans mixing in with less advanced humans and passed the curse of genealogy on. Fight for survival. The rest is history and present day. Which is why virgins are so coveted, because they were untouched, uncorrupted. They represent the Garden of Eden until they are forced into marriage or manipulated into corruption. When that happens, literally humans are cast out of the Garden of Eden, which is earth. They live a short life, like 150 years or less. Once they become so corrupt, they must leave. That's the death process. Earth is the Garden of Eden. My world is trying to reverse the corruption and release the corruption and become uncorruptible, right? But if you do get corrupted, you pay penance and called pain and mucus and repent until you are completely uncorrupted, releasing the demons daily. And you get to stay in paradise called earth. But there is a price to pay to live on earth. The more corrupt you become, the more you have to pay. But if you take out so much credit and you can't pay it back, you become bankrupt and then you're forced out. That's called hospice, then death. So I knew there was a whole reasoning behind pain, currency, paying, hospice, death, palliative care, the credit system, the financial system. Okay? The financial system is directly correlated to the humans and their currency and frequencies, and of course all their family and friends and groupthink. And so, yeah, when you realize that that's how people get so corrupted, is they become so greedy for fame, fortune, baubles, and experiences, then they become so corrupt, because then you're also taking on microbes. And if you're not releasing those demons and becoming sick because you are cured, because you want to keep that party going, so to speak, then you will pay with your life. But hey, you had a good life, right? That's the financial system in the microbial world of life. And that's the Garden of Eden. And so I said, oh yeah, the biodome, the Garden of Eden. And you're looking like, oh wow. Well, that's me looking, oh wow. And so with that said, I see why Catholicism was so popular. Sin and forgiven, big families, and cancer and money. And so I said, I proved immortality in Genesis. Go down my timeline and watch the last video. The story of Adam and Eve is the proof of human immortality. Of course, it is allegorical, because Adam and Eve would have had to release the demons in the Garden of Eden as they were exposed to each other. Spit microbes, animal microbes, and insect microbes. But the premise of the story is virginal women and men who release demons and eat all food, who do not hang out so much in diverse company unless that process is poured by all food, tolerance to pain and release could potentially live indefinitely. So as I pull myself away from society and from groupthink and from religion and politics and all the science stuff, and even from the voting system, I pull myself away from social interaction for the most part. And I stay mostly solitary with my husband, who comes around occasionally. You know, I'm not going to be as corrupted. I'm not going to be drinking. I'm not going to be smoking. I'm not going to be exchanging microbes. I'm not going to be putting myself in situations where I have to deal with someone who is intolerant or whatever. And then that makes it easier to release the demons and to live in a world that is so corrupt right now, that you have all these demons of microbes and disease flying back and forth as people exchange them. Okay, and then all the habits out there. All right. And so And so the premise of the story is virginal women and men who release demons and eat all food, who do not hang out too much in diverse company, unless that process is supported by all food, tolerance to pain and release, could potentially live indefinitely. Original sin was the first sexual experience in mankind person. Then the suffering, long suffering. Did Adam and Eve exist as an actual couple? They were a representation of humanity. There was no proof to say they were an actual couple, but because remember, humans came from primates who became hominids, then cultivated intelligence with the help of each other, and they developed intellectual capability through letters and numbers, also known as language, and the written word, even oral tradition. But when the Nephilim and the gods came into play, who were these teachers? Who taught mankind everything they knew? And then that's when I figured out that maybe it was probably a science experiment. Adam and Eve were the first official humans who became more organized and more intelligent than their surroundings. They were the chosen. Those two were the chosen. Maybe that's why the Jews say that they're the chosen ones, because they wrote the story of Adam and Eve and how that came apart, how that came. And so maybe Adam and Eve were the chosen ones. Were they Jewish? Well, you could say, everything's a story. But maybe that's the background of that story, that Adam and Eve were the chosen ones to discover a lot more than they did. Because they were all innocent, like Gilgamesh was all innocent, and then once he had sexual relations, the train left the station. And so, who were these teachers? Who taught mankind everything they knew? The giants, or the Bible and Tartaria. And stories must be developed to explain the human condition. Oral and written traditions always evolve. They never stay the same, because everyone's perspective is different based upon who you ask. Which is why the Constitution is a living document. Nothing is ever supposed to stay the same or cured. History evolves, people evolve, marriages could evolve, but if you are that adamant to never change, history dies, people die, marriage dies. You were never meant to be cured. People only accuse you of lying because they cannot handle somebody else's truth. If you must accuse somebody of lying, it just goes to show how intolerant you are to somebody else's truth. If an action requires a justice system intervention, that's when you prove somebody is lying. But if there is no crime committed, consider another thought process and stop accusing people of lying. My observation, many people lie to themselves and they cannot handle another thought process, as they cannot handle another thought process. And so I said, taking remedies to mitigate disease are developing microbial offspring fertility, who are now programmed to compromise immunological processes. All right, so when you develop children who are against a person, place, or thing, okay, it's no different than you taking a medicine to stop your body from releasing through the coughing, and you've just programmed offspring to disable your ability to cough out the toxins and the pathogens. Okay, so when people are taking remedies to mitigate disease, they are developing microbial offspring fertility who are now programmed to compromise your immunological processes. You develop offspring and remedies to work against your immune system. That is fertility. When enough offspring from remedies and public exposure are trapped in the immune system, sexual reproduction is triggered via the next step, consent for sexual congress, then the long road to mortality, or a short road in this environment. Consent equals consensus, agreed upon cultures for life, death, fertility. Hell is fertility. And so when I said paradise is the Garden of Eden, minus all the ruckus of friends and family and domestic servants, paradise was just Adam, or Atom, and Eve in the Garden of Eden. No kids, no pets, not war, no drugs or alcohol, no fertility or disease or death or sexual congress. Adam and Eve were originally immortal. I knew it. Until they had intercourse, disease, war, death, and then the long road to mortality, paradise lost. Try telling this to Judeo-Christian world. The ultimate resistance. I tried to warn you. The story of Adam and Eve is the ultimate human story from immortality to mortality. It's time for Eve to develop her personal rebellion and regain back her paradise, if she's even allowed to. And so, yeah, I just connected all of the dots. And I even understand why the Jews think they're the chosen ones. Because Adam and Eve were chosen to be the experiments. They were once innocent, and then when they disappeared, when they disobeyed God, they were cast out. And so all of us are experiments. And when we disobey the laws of life in our body by developing corruption and fertility, okay, because it had to happen in order for the world to develop what it's developed. But now some of us can regain paradise back, regain our life back, and some of us will have to go through the process to be the stories that entertain those who are immortal. That's the Hunger Games. When those who made themselves expendable are the stories behind the TV programs and the entertainment. So when you think about Hollywood, they are you. Everyone in Hollywood is basically everyone in your community, and they were paid a lot of money to represent. And so the system wants to have a lot of people and little cultures, so people learn from each other. But then what will the world be like? Well, we'll have all the movies of all the past corruption to remind us, and then develop. See, what would the new world develop when you don't have so many people suffering from, well, you'll have people suffering in other places, but they won't know they're suffering. They'll just be televised and be given this, and they may be censored information so they don't see the world of immortality. And so then you have this little island of mortals who are going through their own wars, and that will be the entertainment for the immortals, in my opinion, just like the Hunger Games. Okay? And so maybe down the road, then we'll have interesting animals, exotic animals. Anything is possible. But right now we have to control really corrupt, evil, mean people. And the system is doing that. They're cleaning up the petri dish. Just stay alive if you can. All right, bye.